Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's May 15, 2023, and this is episode 814. Following on from part 1 of this series, today we pick up the trail on my recent complete Namibia tour as we head back into Colemanskop for a second afternoon of shooting. The first photo that I want to share is of a favourite room of mine with a couple of indoor sand dunes, and there are gaps between the roof slats that allow light to pour into the room at certain times of the day, making for striking light and shadow patterns. Although, as I mentioned last week, I don't worry about windows getting overexposed here, I am careful to ensure that I don't overexpose the bright areas of the wall where the light is shining through the slats in the roof. I set a small aperture of f14 to get lots of depth of field, and then, because I was using a tripod and nothing in the scene was moving, I set my ISO to 100. Then all that remains is for me to set my shutter speed to the setting that gives me a good exposure with the bright areas of the image on the right side of the histogram. In this case, that was a 30th of a second. The following image of another house shows multiple doors with rooms full of sand. The room in the foreground's floor has given way on the left side so that accumulated sand has slipped away to the left. I prefer natural patterns from the wind in the sand to footprints, but in some rooms it's inevitable. To give you an idea of the available light here, at the same aperture and ISO as the previous image, this one required a shutter speed of 1.6 seconds to record the image that you see. A similar composition here with a different room with blue walls, but the sand is much higher in the room than the previous image. I think I prefer these blue walls over the brown ones, and I like how the terracotta coloured wall in the second room in this shot is almost a complementary colour to the blue. This next shot is the final image I will share from Colemanskop for this trip, and it's one that I've shared before, but I love this tiny little blue room that I have to shoot through a broken panel in the door, as the door itself is now completely buried in the sand and impossible to move. We drove from Luderitz to Sossusvlei in the Naukluft National Park the following day, where we would spend the following 3 nights. During the drive, we started to see wildlife, and although we didn't have a lot of time to stop, we couldn't resist trying our hands with the beautiful greater kestrel that we saw on fence posts several times. We often switch between slow-paced landscape photography and fast-paced wildlife work for the next few days. For this image, I used a shutter speed of 1/3200th of a second to ensure that I froze the bird in the air, and my aperture was down at f10 because I was using a 1.4 times extender on my Canon RF 100-500mm lens, although I generally stop down to around f10 for a single animal anyway. After all, I want to ensure that I get enough of the animal sharp. Many people that shoot wildlife shoot with the aperture wide open so that they can keep the shutter speed high and ISO low, but in my opinion that generally doesn't give you enough depth of field to do the subject justice. Also, when there are 2 or more animals in the scene, I generally stop down to around f14 for even greater depth of field. The following morning, for the first time since I've been travelling to Namibia, we could not photograph the dead camel thorn trees in Dead Vlei because there were clouds in the sky. so there was not enough contrast between the backlit dune and the foreground trees. Dead Flay was also quite crowded on our first visit, although we'd have been able to work around that. On our way back, though, the sun came out and gave us some nice shadows, highlighting the texture on the shade side and the beautiful curves of the dune known as Big Mama, as you can see in the following photograph. This is a stitch of around 5 photos to make this panorama, so the resulting image is around 150 megapixels. I could and probably will print this big when I get a little time. During the day, the animals are not active, and the group is generally happy for some time to relax, so we took a few hours off and then went back out in the late afternoon to photograph one of the dunes. I love to photograph them as the sun is just about to go below the horizon, as that makes the deepest shadows on the left side of the dune and some great contrast, as you see here.